I thought I had it all figured out. Picture this: a cozy apartment overlooking the city, morning coffee shared with someone I believed was my soulmate, and plans for a future that seemed absolutely perfect. My name is Emma, and for 3 years, I lived what I thought was a fairy tale with Jake. He was charming, successful, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Every morning he'd kiss me goodbye before heading to his marketing job, and every evening he'd come home with stories about his day and dreams about our future together. Our relationship felt like something out of a romantic movie. We'd spend weekends exploring new restaurants, planning vacations we'd take someday, and talking about the house we'd buy and the life we'd build. Jake was the kind of guy who remembered anniversary dates, brought me flowers on random Tuesdays, and made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. He had this way of looking at me that made me feel beautiful, cherished, and completely secure in our love. I remember thinking how lucky I was. While my friends dealt with dating apps and heartbreak, I had found my person. We had our little rituals: Sunday morning pancakes, Thursday night movie marathons, and those long conversations about everything and nothing that lasted until 3 in the morning. Jake would tell me about his childhood dreams, his fears, and his hopes for our future. He'd hold my hand during scary movies and laugh at my terrible jokes like they were the funniest things he'd ever heard. If you're watching this and thinking about your own relationship, I want you to take a moment and hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to share will change how you see love, trust, and the signs we sometimes choose to ignore. The perfect relationship I thought I had was about to crumble in ways I never imagined possible. But here's the thing about perfect relationships: they're often too good to be true. There were little things, tiny red flags that I brushed off because I was so in love with the idea of us. Jake would get mysterious phone calls that he'd take in another room. He'd claim they were work calls, but who talks about quarterly reports with such hushed, intimate tones? He started working late more often, coming home with elaborate explanations about demanding clients and urgent projects that required his immediate attention. I noticed he'd become protective of his phone in a way he'd never been before. It used to sit casually on our coffee table, unlocked and accessible. Suddenly, it was always face down, always within arm's reach, and always protected by a password he claimed was for security reasons. When I'd tease him about it, he'd laugh it off and change the subject, distracting me with kisses and promises of weekend getaways. Looking back, I can see how naive I was. Love has this incredible ability to blind us to obvious truths. We create elaborate explanations for suspicious behavior because accepting the alternative is too painful. I told myself that Jake was just stressed about work, that his secretive phone calls were about planning surprises for me, and that his late nights were investments in our future financial security. The truth has a way of revealing itself when you least expect it. It was a rainy Thursday evening in November when my perfect world began to unravel. Jake had left his phone charging in the bedroom while he showered, and for the first time in months, I heard it buzzing with notifications. Normally, I wouldn't have paid attention. I trusted him completely and respected his privacy, but something about the frequency of the buzzing made me curious. I walked into the bedroom, and his phone screen was lighting up with message after message. From where I stood, I could see a name I didn't recognize: Sophia. My heart started racing. Jake had never mentioned anyone named Sophia, and that heart emoji next to her name sent chills down my spine. I knew I shouldn't look, but something deep in my gut was screaming that I needed to know the truth. My hands were shaking as I picked up his phone. The messages were still appearing on the lock screen, and what I saw made my knees weak. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby." "Jake, you make me feel so alive. I love how you make me laugh, especially when you tell me about your boring roommate at home." Roommate. She called me his roommate. I could hear the shower still running, and I knew I had only a few minutes before Jake would come out. With trembling fingers, I tried different passcodes until I found the one that worked: our anniversary date, the same date he'd been using to build an entire secret relationship with another woman. The irony was devastating. Opening his messages with Sophia was like watching my life implode in real time. Months of conversations, photos, intimate details about their relationship, and worst of all, conversations about me. He'd been portraying me as a clingy roommate he was trying to get rid of, someone who was holding him back from his real happiness. According to their messages, they'd been seeing each other for 8 months. 8 months of lies, deception, and betrayal while I planned our future together. There were photos of them together at places I recognized: the restaurant where Jake told me he was having work dinners, the hotel where he claimed he was attending business conferences, even our favorite coffee shop where he'd apparently been taking Sophia on dates during his lunch breaks. She was beautiful, successful, and clearly believed that Jake was single and available. The messages revealed the depth of his deception. He'd been living a double life so elaborate that it bordered on sociopathic. Jake had created an entire alternate reality where I didn't exist as his girlfriend, where our 3-year relationship was reduced to an inconvenient living situation he was planning to change soon. He'd been promising Sophia that he'd end things with his roommate and find his own place so they could be together properly. I sat on our bed, scrolling through months of their relationship, while listening to the man I loved shower, completely unaware that his world of lies was about to collapse. The most painful part wasn't just the cheating, it was how he'd been discussing our most intimate moments with her, turning our private jokes into shared laughs with another woman, and using our relationship as entertainment for his real romance. The shower turned off, and I heard Jake humming our song, the same song he'd apparently been humming with Sophia just hours earlier, according to their messages. I quickly put his phone back where I'd found it, and tried to compose myself, but my entire body was shaking with a combination of rage, heartbreak, and disbelief. How do you confront someone about a betrayal so complete that it redefines everything you thought you knew about your life? Jake walked out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist, smiling at me the same way he had for 3 years. "Hey, beautiful," he said, completely oblivious to the fact that I'd just discovered his entire secret life. "How was your day?" The casualness of his question, the normalcy of his tone, the way he could look me in the eyes and act like nothing had changed, it was almost more devastating than the cheating itself. I watched him get dressed for what he'd told me was a late work meeting. Now I knew he was getting dressed to see Sophia, probably to discuss their weekend plans and laugh about how clueless his roommate was about their relationship. The audacity was breathtaking. He was putting on cologne, our cologne, the one I'd bought him for his birthday, to smell good for another woman. "Jake," I said, and something in my voice must have given away my emotional state, because he turned to look at me with concern. "Who is Sophia?" The question hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. I watched his face go through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, panic, and then that calculating look that appears when someone is trying to figure out how much you know before they decide how much to admit. "Sophia?" he repeated, buying himself time to construct a lie. "She's just a colleague from work. Why do you ask?" His voice was steady, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He was still hoping he could explain this away, still believing he could manipulate me into accepting whatever story he was about to create. I pulled out my own phone and showed him screenshots I'd quickly taken of their conversation. His face went white as he realized the extent of what I'd discovered. There was no way to explain away messages calling me his roommate, no way to justify 8 months of secret dates and intimate conversations with another woman. The evidence was undeniable, and we both knew it. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, you'll understand what happened next. I want you to leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share about confronting betrayal and finding your strength might be exactly what someone in your area needs to hear today. The argument that followed was unlike anything we'd ever experienced. Jake went through the classic stages of being caught: denial, minimization, blame shifting, and finally angry justification. He tried to tell me that what I'd seen wasn't what it looked like, then admitted to the relationship, but claimed it wasn't serious, then blamed me for being too clingy and forcing him to find happiness elsewhere. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," he said, as if his stress justified 8 months of elaborate deception. "Sophia gets me in ways you never did. She doesn't question every little thing I do or make me feel guilty for wanting space." The cruelty of his words was intentional. He was trying to hurt me as much as I'd hurt him by discovering his secret. But something strange happened during that confrontation. Instead of crumbling the way I expected to, instead of begging him to choose me or promising to change to win him back, I felt something else entirely. I felt clarity. For the first time in months, maybe years, I was seeing Jake exactly as he was. Not as the man I wanted him to be, not as the partner I'd imagined, but as someone capable of sustained deception, emotional manipulation, and breathtaking selfishness. The man standing in front of me, making excuses for his betrayal and trying to make me feel responsible for his choices, wasn't someone I wanted to fight for. He wasn't someone worth the tears I'd been ready to cry, or the forgiveness I'd been prepared to offer. He was a stranger, wearing the face of someone I'd loved, and that realization was both devastating and liberating. That night, after Jake left for his work meeting, which I now knew was a romantic dinner with Sophia, I sat alone in our apartment and made the most important decision of my life. I wasn't going to beg, cry, or try to win him back. I wasn't going to compete with Sophia or attempt to prove my worth to someone who had already shown me exactly how little I meant to him. Instead, I was going to do something that would change both of our lives forever. I spent hours that night researching divorce lawyers, even though we weren't married, just to understand how shared assets and living situations get divided when relationships end. I looked up the lease agreement for our apartment, checked our joint bank accounts, and made a list of everything we owned together. What I discovered was eye-opening. Jake had been living far beyond his means, funding his double life with credit cards and loans he'd been hiding from me. Our joint account, which I'd assumed was healthy because Jake handled most of the finances, was nearly empty. He'd been withdrawing money consistently to pay for his dates with Sophia, expensive restaurants, weekend getaways, gifts that I'd assumed were work expenses. The financial deception was almost as shocking as the emotional betrayal. He'd been spending our future on another woman, while telling me we needed to save money for our plans together. But here's where Jake made his biggest mistake. He'd been using money from our shared business savings account, money I'd contributed equally to over the past 2 years, to fund his affair. We'd been putting aside money to start a consulting business together, after Jake's marketing experience and my background in graphic design. That account had almost $12,000, money that represented our shared dreams and my individual contributions. I realized that while Jake had been betraying me emotionally, he'd also been stealing from me financially. Every romantic dinner with Sophia, every hotel room, every gift he'd given her had been paid for partially with my money. The audacity was staggering, but it also gave me something I hadn't expected: legal and moral justification for what I was about to do. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent hours researching business licenses, freelance platforms, and online marketing strategies. If Jake could live a secret life for 8 months, I could certainly plan a secret future for myself. I began sketching out ideas for my own graphic design business, calculating startup costs, and identifying potential clients. By morning, I had a business plan that would use our shared savings, my money that he'd been spending on his mistress, to build something entirely my own. The next morning, Jake came home from his night with Sophia acting like nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead, made coffee, and started talking about weekend plans as if he hadn't spent the previous evening with another woman planning their own weekend getaway. The compartmentalization was masterful and terrifying. He could switch between his 2 lives seamlessly, showing no guilt or discomfort about lying to both women who loved him. "I was thinking we could go to that new brunch place on Saturday," he said, buttering his toast with the same hands that had been holding Sophia just hours earlier. "You've been stressed lately, and I think we need some quality time together." The manipulation in his concern was obvious now that I knew the truth. He was managing me, keeping me content while he figured out how to transition fully to his life with Sophia. I smiled and agreed to brunch, but inside I was already 3 steps ahead of him. While Jake was playing his game of deception, I was preparing to change the rules entirely. I had learned something valuable from discovering his betrayal. The person who controls the information has the power. Jake thought he knew what was happening, but he had no idea that his victim was about to become something much more dangerous, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a master of my own deception. While Jake continued his double life, coming home with elaborate stories about work stress and demanding clients, I was quietly building an escape plan that would secure my future and leave him dealing with the consequences of his choices. The difference between his deception and mine was crucial. His was designed to hurt and betray, while mine was designed to protect and empower. Every day while Jake was at work, or so he claimed, I was establishing my own business. I registered Emma Creative Solutions as a limited liability company, opened a business bank account, and started reaching out to potential clients through LinkedIn and design forums. My background in graphic design, which Jake had often dismissed as just a hobby, suddenly became the foundation for my independence. I was careful to keep my activities hidden, just as Jake had hidden his affair. I used my personal laptop, communicated with clients through a separate email address, and conducted business calls during my lunch breaks, or when Jake was out with Sophia. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using the same secretive tactics he'd perfected, but for constructive rather than destructive purposes. My first client came through a referral from a former colleague who needed a complete rebrand for her startup. The project was worth $3,000, more money than I'd ever made independently. As I worked on her logo designs and marketing materials late at night, while Jake slept beside me, probably dreaming about Sophia, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete ownership of my own success. The work was challenging and exciting in ways that my routine day job had never been. I was making creative decisions, solving problems, and building something entirely my own. Each completed project gave me more confidence and more financial independence. Within those 2 weeks, I'd landed 4 clients and was earning almost as much through my side business as I made at my regular job. But the most satisfying part wasn't the money, it was the planning. I was systematically preparing to extract myself from Jake's life in a way that would leave him scrambling to maintain the lifestyle he'd built on lies. I calculated exactly how much of our shared savings I was entitled to, documented every expense he'd charged to our joint accounts for his affair, and prepared a detailed financial breakdown that would justify my actions. I also started looking for my own apartment, something Jake would never expect, because I'd always been financially dependent on our shared living situation. But my new business income, combined with my rightful share of our savings, would make independence possible. I found a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood than where we currently lived, a place that represented the new life I was building for myself. Every evening, Jake would come home and tell me about his day, weaving elaborate fictions about meetings and projects that I now knew were cover stories for his time with Sophia. I would listen, nod, and ask follow-up questions, all while mentally calculating how much money he'd probably spent on his other relationship that day. The power dynamic had shifted completely, even though he had no idea. If you're watching this and you've ever felt powerless in a relationship, I want you to understand something important. Take a moment to hit the like button if this story is resonating with you, because what I'm about to share about building your own power and independence could change your perspective on what's possible when someone betrays your trust. 3 weeks into my secret business venture, something unexpected happened. I was thriving. What had started as a desperate plan to secure my financial independence had evolved into something much bigger. Emma Creative Solutions was gaining momentum beyond my wildest expectations, and I was discovering talents and ambitions I'd never known I possessed. My client base had grown to 8 regular accounts, including 2 major projects that would bring in over $5,000 each. I was working with tech startups, local businesses, and even a non-profit organization that needed a complete visual identity overhaul. The variety was exciting, and each project pushed me to develop new skills and creative solutions. The most significant breakthrough came when one of my clients, a small marketing agency, offered me a contract to handle all their design work for the next 6 months. The retainer alone was more money than I'd ever seen in my personal account, and it represented the kind of financial security that would make leaving Jake not just possible, but comfortable. But Jake was starting to notice changes, even though I was being careful to hide my activities. I was more confident, more independent, and less emotionally available for his manipulation games. When he'd come home with stories designed to make me feel guilty or insecure, I'd respond with calm understanding, instead of the anxiety and reassurance-seeking behavior he was used to. "You seem different lately," he said one evening, studying my face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "More distant. Is everything okay with us?" The irony of him questioning my emotional availability while maintaining an 8-month affair with another woman was almost amusing. He was so accustomed to my complete attention and emotional dependence that my newfound self-sufficiency registered as a threat. I assured him that everything was fine, that I was just focused on some personal projects. When he asked what kind of projects, I gave vague answers about exploring creative outlets and working on personal growth. The beauty of truth wrapped in ambiguity is that it's technically honest while revealing nothing important. Jake seemed satisfied with my explanations, but I could sense his unease. He started being more attentive, bringing me flowers more frequently, suggesting date nights and romantic getaways. What he didn't realize was that his increased attention felt hollow, because I knew it was motivated by guilt and fear rather than genuine love. Every romantic gesture reminded me of the elaborate performance he'd been maintaining with both Sophia and me. Meanwhile, I was making final preparations for my departure. I'd found the perfect apartment and secured the lease with my business income, as proof of financial stability. I'd arranged for utilities, internet, and all the practical necessities of independent living. Most importantly, I'd prepared a detailed financial settlement that would give me exactly what I was legally and morally entitled to from our shared accounts. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would take my rightful share of our savings, move into my new apartment, and present Jake with the evidence of his financial and emotional betrayal along with my decision to end our relationship. But I wasn't just leaving him, I was leaving him with the consequences of his choices while positioning myself for success. My new apartment was in a building with a rooftop garden and a view of the city skyline. It represented everything I wanted for my future: independence, beauty, and unlimited potential. As I signed the lease using money I'd earned through my own hard work and talent, I felt a satisfaction that was completely different from anything I'd experienced during my relationship with Jake. 6 weeks after discovering Jake's betrayal, I was living a double life that rivaled his in complexity, but surpassed it in purpose. By day, I maintained the facade of our relationship, playing the role of the unsuspecting girlfriend, while secretly preparing for my dramatic exit. By night, and during stolen moments throughout the day, I was building an empire that would ensure my future security and success. My business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible. Emma Creative Solutions now had 15 regular clients, a waiting list for new projects, and a monthly income that exceeded what Jake made at his marketing job. The success wasn't just financial. I was gaining recognition in the design community, receiving referrals from satisfied clients, and developing a reputation for innovative work and professional reliability. The transformation was affecting every aspect of my life. I was sleeping better, eating healthier, and feeling more energetic than I had in years. The stress and anxiety that had been constant companions during the final months of my relationship with Jake had disappeared, replaced by excitement about my future and pride in my accomplishments. Jake, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly agitated by changes he couldn't identify or understand. I was less needy, less available for his emotional manipulation, and less impressed by his stories about work success and future plans. When he'd try to engage me in conversations about our relationship or our future together, I'd respond with polite interest, but without the investment and enthusiasm he was accustomed to. "I feel like you're not really present when we're together," he complained one evening after I'd responded to his story about a difficult client with distracted sympathy rather than the detailed support and advice he expected. "It's like your mind is somewhere else all the time." He was right, of course. My mind was focused on client projects, business strategies, and the exciting future I was creating for myself. What Jake didn't know was that his own behavior was becoming more erratic and suspicious as his relationship with Sophia intensified. He was staying out later, being more secretive with his phone, and occasionally slipping up by mentioning places or experiences that didn't align with the stories he'd told me. But instead of causing me pain or anxiety, these slips confirmed that I was making the right decision. I started documenting everything with the systematic thoroughness of someone preparing for legal proceedings. I took screenshots of our joint account statements showing his unauthorized withdrawals, saved evidence of his lies about his whereabouts, and created a timeline of his deceptive behavior, not because I planned to pursue legal action, but because I wanted undeniable proof of his betrayal when I finally confronted him. The most satisfying moment came when Jake suggested we should start planning a vacation together for the summer. "I've been thinking about that trip to Europe we talked about," he said, pulling out his laptop to show me travel websites. "Maybe we could do Italy and France, really take our time and see everything." The suggestion was obviously motivated by guilt and his recognition that our relationship was deteriorating, but it also represented the pinnacle of his delusion. Jake was planning a romantic vacation with me while maintaining his relationship with Sophia, apparently believing he could manage both situations indefinitely. He had no idea that instead of European vacation plans, I was preparing moving boxes and lease agreements. While he was researching romantic hotels in Rome, I was scheduling the movers who would transport my belongings to my new apartment. "That sounds wonderful," I told him, matching his enthusiasm while mentally calculating that the timeline for his proposed vacation would be several months after I'd already ended our relationship and established my new life. "We should definitely look into it." The conversation was surreal, two people discussing a future together, while one person planned betrayal and the other planned liberation. That night, as Jake slept peacefully beside me, Probably dreaming about either Sophia or our fictional European vacation, I finalized the last details of my exit strategy. Tomorrow, I would give my landlord notice that I'd be moving out at the end of the month. Next week, I would transfer my share of our joint savings to my business account. And by the end of the month, Jake would discover that the woman he'd been deceiving and manipulating had become someone he'd never expected, someone who was several steps ahead of him and completely beyond his control. The day I'd been preparing for finally arrived. It was a Saturday morning, exactly 2 months after I'd discovered Jake's betrayal, and I was ready to reveal the truth about what I'd been building while he'd been living his lie. Jake was in the kitchen making coffee, humming that same song he'd been humming with Sophia, completely unaware that his comfortable world was about to implode. "Jake," I said, walking into the kitchen with a folder full of documents and my laptop bag over my shoulder. "We need to talk." Something in my tone made him look up from his coffee with the same concerned expression he'd worn the night I'd first asked about Sophia. But this time, I wasn't the broken, confused woman who'd discovered his secret phone. I was someone entirely different. I opened my laptop and showed him the website for Emma Creative Solutions. His eyes widened as he saw my professional portfolio, client testimonials, and the About page that featured my photograph and described my expertise in brand development and creative strategy. "What is this?" he asked, but I could see he was already beginning to understand. "This is my business," I said calmly. "The business I've been building for the past 2 months while you've been living your double life with Sophia." I watched his face go through the same series of expressions I'd experienced when I discovered his betrayal: confusion, recognition, and then a dawning awareness of how completely his world had shifted. I showed him my client contracts, my business bank statements, and the lease agreement for my new apartment. Each document was another piece of evidence that while he'd been focused on managing his deception, I'd been building something real and substantial. "I've been earning more money than you make at your marketing job," I continued, "and I've secured enough contracts to support myself independently for the next year." Jake stared at the screen, showing my monthly revenue figures, his coffee growing cold in his hands. "I don't understand," he said. "When did you do all this? How did you—" But then he stopped, realizing that he couldn't ask how I'd managed to build a secret life without acknowledging that he'd been living one himself. "While you were out with Sophia," I said, "while you were spending our money on your affair, while you were lying to both of us about who you really are, I was building my future. Every late night you thought I was sleeping, I was working with clients. Every weekend you claimed to be at work conferences, I was developing business relationships and creating financial independence." I pulled out the financial documents I'd prepared, showing him exactly how much of our shared money he'd spent on his relationship with Sophia. $8,347, I said, sliding the detailed breakdown across the table. "That's how much of our joint savings you've spent on hotels, restaurants, gifts, and trips with another woman. Money that was supposed to be for our future together." The evidence was undeniable, and Jake knew it. He couldn't deny the bank statements, couldn't explain away the pattern of withdrawals that corresponded exactly with his secret dates. But what seemed to shock him most wasn't the financial documentation. It was the realization that I had become someone he didn't recognize, someone who had outmaneuvered him completely. "Emma, please," he said, and for the first time since I'd known him, Jake looked genuinely vulnerable. "I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can rebuild trust. You don't have to leave. We don't have to throw away 3 years together." The desperation in his voice was real, but it was too late for appeals to our shared history. "I'm not throwing away 3 years," I replied. "I'm reclaiming them. Every skill I developed, every dream I shared with you, every part of myself that I invested in our relationship, I've taken all of that and built something that belongs entirely to me, something you can't betray, manipulate, or take away." The movers were scheduled to arrive in 2 hours. My new apartment was fully furnished and ready for me to begin my independent life. Emma Creative Solutions had a full roster of clients and a waiting list for new projects. I had built an entire world that existed completely separate from Jake and his lies, and now it was time to step fully into that world. As the reality of my departure settled in, Jake went through what I can only describe as the 5 stages of grief in Fast Forward. First came denial. "You're not serious about this, you're upset, and you have every right to be, but you're not actually going to leave." Then anger. "You've been lying to me just as much as I was lying to you. You've been sneaking around, hiding things, building this secret business behind my back." The irony of Jake accusing me of deception while sitting in our kitchen, surrounded by evidence of his 8-month affair, would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. The difference, I told him calmly, is that my secret was building something positive for my future, while yours was destroying our relationship and stealing from our shared resources. Bargaining came next, and it was desperate and elaborate. Jake promised to end things with Sophia immediately, to go to therapy, to be completely transparent about everything. He offered to give me access to all his accounts, to check in with me throughout the day, to do whatever it would take to rebuild trust. "I'll prove to you that you're the one I really want," he said. "Sophia means nothing to me. She was just a distraction, a mistake. You're my real life." But what Jake didn't understand was that I no longer wanted to be chosen. I didn't want to win a competition for his affection or prove that I was better than Sophia. I had discovered something much more valuable than being the preferred option in someone else's game. I had learned to value myself independently of his choices, desires, or validation. "Jake," I said, and my voice was gentler than it had been all morning because I genuinely felt sorry for him. "This isn't about Sophia. This isn't about whether you choose her or me. This is about the fact that I've spent 2 months building a life where I don't need to be chosen by anyone except myself." The movers arrived exactly on schedule, and Jake watched in stunned silence as they loaded boxes of my belongings into their truck. I had been systematically packing for weeks, taking my clothes, books, personal items, and office equipment without him noticing. The efficiency of my departure was another reminder of how completely he had underestimated me. As my furniture was loaded onto the truck, Jake made one final attempt to change my mind. "Emma, look at me," he said, taking my hands in his. "I love you. I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible choices, but I love you. We can move past this. We can be stronger than we were before." For a moment, looking into his eyes, I could see the man I had fallen in love with 3 years earlier, but I could also see the man who had looked into those same eyes and lied to me every day for 8 months. I could see someone who was capable of elaborate deception, who could compartmentalize his emotions so completely that he could plan a future with me while building a life with someone else. That wasn't love, that was manipulation, control, and emotional compartmentalization that bordered on pathological. "I believe that you love me in the way that you're capable of loving someone," I told him. "But your version of love includes betrayal, lies, and using shared resources to fund relationships with other people. My version of love requires honesty, respect, and genuine partnership. We're speaking different languages, and I'm not interested in learning yours anymore." The final blow came when I handed him his portion of our financial settlement. After calculating his unauthorized withdrawals and the money he owed me for his affair expenses, his share of our joint savings was significantly less than what I was taking to start my new life. "This is what's left after you spent our money on Sophia," I said. "Consider it an expensive lesson in the cost of betrayal." Jake stared at the check, and I could see him calculating not just the financial impact, but the full scope of what he was losing. He was losing me, our shared apartment, the comfortable life we'd built together, and the financial security that had allowed him to maintain his double life. In trying to have everything, he had lost the thing that actually mattered. 6 months later, I received a message from Jake. It was a long, rambling text about how he'd ended things with Sophia, how he'd realized that what we had was real and meaningful, and how he wanted to try again. He had heard through mutual friends about the success of my business, about the new apartment, about how well I was doing, and he wanted to be part of that success. I read his message while sitting in my home office, looking out at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new apartment. Emma Creative Solutions had grown beyond my wildest expectations. I now had 23 regular clients, 2 part-time employees, and a waiting list that extended 3 months into the future. I had been featured in a design magazine and invited to speak at a marketing conference about building creative businesses. But the most significant change wasn't professional, it was personal. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to value my own opinion, and to build a life that reflected my actual priorities rather than someone else's expectations. I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed, and capabilities that had been dormant during my relationship with Jake. The woman who had discovered her boyfriend's betrayal 8 months earlier felt like a different person entirely. That Emma had been devastated by the idea that she wasn't enough to keep Jake faithful. This Emma understood that Jake's faithfulness had nothing to do with her worth and everything to do with his character. that Emma had been willing to compete for love. This Emma understood that real love doesn't require competition. I looked at Jake's message asking for another chance, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Not gratitude for his betrayal, but gratitude for the way his betrayal had forced me to discover who I really was when I wasn't trying to be what someone else wanted me to be. His cheating had been the catalyst for the most transformative period of my life. I typed a response. Jake, I appreciate you reaching out, and I'm glad you've learned something from our experience. I've learned something too, that the best revenge isn't hurting someone who hurt you. The best revenge is building a life so fulfilling that their presence or absence becomes irrelevant to your happiness. I wish you well, but I'm not interested in revisiting the past when my future is so much more interesting. I hit send and then deleted his number from my phone, not out of anger or spite, but because I genuinely had no use for it anymore. Jake represented a chapter of my life that had ended, and I was fully invested in writing the next one. That evening, I had dinner with friends who had supported me through my transformation. We toasted to new beginnings, to the courage it takes to rebuild your life, and to the unexpected gifts that sometimes come disguised as betrayals. You know what's amazing about your story, one of my friends said. Jake thought he was getting away with something, but really he was just giving you the push you needed to become who you were always meant to be. She was right. Jake's betrayal hadn't been the end of my story. It had been the beginning of a better one. The unexpected revenge wasn't anything I had done to him. It was what I had done for myself. I had become someone so complete, so successful, and so genuinely happy that his opinion of me had become irrelevant. If you've made it this far in my story, I want you to do something for me. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that betrayal doesn't have to break you. It can be the thing that helps you discover your own strength. Comment below and tell me about a time when something that seemed like an ending became a new beginning for you. And remember, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. The woman who had cried over Jake's betrayal was gone. In her place was someone who had learned that the most powerful thing you can do when someone shows you who they really are is to believe them, and then build a life that's so much better than anything they could have given you that their absence becomes a gift rather than a loss.